Genesis House and the Friends in Recovery podcast are proud to bring you Answering the Call, the First Responder podcast. Join your host, Mike the Podfather, and Jersey Ed as they address the real issues in health and wellness for first responders, from physical and mental health to relationships and work-life balance. We leave no stone unturned. Answering the Call, the First Responder podcast is available on Facebook, Podbean, iTunes, and YouTube, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Now, here are your friends in recovery answering the call. Welcome to another episode of Answering the Call, the First Responder podcast, sponsored by Genesis House and produced by Sweets Productions in Beverly, Mass. And now, here are your hosts, the Podfather, Mike Miles, and Jersey Ed.
Thank you, Sweets. As always, we are happy to be here, ready and available to help our first responders out there across the country and abroad.
That's right, Mike. You know, I love learning about the new topics, and some of the, so do our listeners do too. I can tell from all the emails and calls that we get all the time, and in social media chatters. So it's just it's been a really good run, and it's been for one show we got down. We had some studio renovations last week.
Absolutely.
Last couple
renovations.
Weeks. Yeah.
It's like a remake.
I know.
You got some upgrades.
We did. The studio looks really, really good. I'm happy to be here. And as you can see, Friends in Recovery answering the call.
That's it. We're here. And today, I actually brought a book with me, Ed.
Yeah.
As you know, I'm a retired police officer,
You
35 years. That's correct.
Is that why you're here?
That's why I'm here.
All right.
Lowell, Massachusetts Police Department. Proud to say I worked with many good police officers there. And I have a book here. It's called A25. And what A25 stands for is Arson 25. Two people in the city of Lowell. One of them was Harold Waterhouse. He was a police officer. And Jason Strunk was a firefighter. And the two of them became the arson squad. There was so many fires back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. People died, mass destructions of properties.
Oh my
So,
God.
yeah, there were a lot of people setting fires, for profit, for perverse pleasure, whatever reason was. This book was written in memory of Jason Strunk. Had a young brother who was a Billerica, Massachusetts police officer who was killed in the line of duty. He was off duty. He approached a truck that was spinning its tires. He was with his family, jumped out of his car, went up to speak to the driver. Somehow he got caught up in the door. The driver took off and slammed into a telephone pole right in front of his family, killed him dead. So when I think of the Strunk family, I think of dedication and heroic actions. What Harold Waterhouse and Jason Strunk have done over the years is they put an end to the fires for profit. They convicted people. It was just amazing. Yeah,
Wow,
this is a
good.
great book. I'm going to get more information on it the next time we're on. As far as I'm pretty sure it's called A25, and I'm pretty sure it's on Amazon.
Okay, good. And if you want, of course, email us or hit us up on Facebook, and Mike will be able to give you more information on that. One thing, I've been answering a lot of emails and getting a lot of good feedback about the first show, Mike. And,
Have you really?
Yeah, I really have. And I do need to share some of them with you because there are some good things in there about you too, believe it or not.
Oh, I'm sure.
But one thing somebody asked, which stood out, and we never discussed it, is why do we smoke cigars on this show?
Well, because we can.
Because we
Number
can,
one,
yes, because it's our show.
right? It's part of us being divas, and we said if we're going to do a show, we're going to smoke cigars.
That's right. And the other reason too is it's a serious topic that we talk about with first responders, and there's serious issues that we have to deal with. But also, we want to have fun. We want this to be a good time for us and for our listeners and our guests.
Right.
So you and I met over a cigar, basically.
That's right.
And that's kind of how we met. And
it certainly forged the friendship. I'll say that.
It did.
I definitely want to thank Taylor from Genesis House for sponsoring these podcasts.
Yeah.
And we don't get paid for doing this.
Nope.
However, he doesn't complain about us smoking cigars.
That's right, on the show. Yes.
Right. And here we have at Sweet Studio, and I just got to say, from the first show until now, which was 2 weeks ago, I cannot believe what I'm seeing here. And Sweets, our producer extraordinaire, without a doubt, has taken this place and turned it into a Class A recording studio, podcast studio. I don't even know what to call it.
Unbelievable. The electronics in here, guys, this is top-notch electronics that you'll get anywhere. The soundboard, Sweets' knowledge of all this stuff is unbelievable. I know this is not first responder stuff, but this is going to get the message out in the right way and clear and all the time. And this is just wonderful. I mean, I can't believe this is what we're in. The studio is unbelievable. I'm gonna take a quick behind the scenes, not now, but later. Look for it on my Facebook. I'm gonna take a quick behind the scenes video, and I'm gonna post it on my Facebook, and we'll post it on the first responders page too. But Sweets, you guys did a really good job here. We got to give you credit. And we're talking about it, but you're the one who had all the work done and just completely turned this place around.
Well, I will say it was quite a project, and for those of you that saw the first video, you can definitely tell that things are a little bit different, and we upgraded just to make sure that the viewers as well as the listeners were having a great experience. So I know you guys have a great message, and I want to make sure the people that are watching it on YouTube have a visual experience as well. So.
Right. Sweets and I had the opportunity to play golf at probably one of the most premier, definitely the most historical golf course in the country, the first one in the country, the Country Club in Brookline. We were there last Tuesday, and he told me he had done some work in the podcast facility, and I just can't believe when I got here this morning and walked in here. I mean, I saw the pictures, but the pictures don't do it justice. And the technology, the equipment is just through the roof.
Yeah. And guys, feedback is always good. Email us, hit us up on Facebook. Let us know what you guys think of this, with this studio here. I mean, you're only seeing a small bit of it, but the whole studio is really converted into a very comfortable and very relaxing studio for us to interview guests and really, get some good information out to everybody,
And as usual, we're here to talk about topics that, heartwarming to us and heartfelt. We're talking about police officers, firemen, EMS, and correctional officers. Anybody that works in the line of work for law enforcement or, is helping people, fire department, EMS. And I think we've really hit the ground running, and we have a lot of knowledge. We have some great guests, lined up, and between the two of us and of course Sweets. I think we're going to do a real bang up job.
Yeah. And one thing, Mike, I wanted to, a long list of the first responders is definitely what we need on the show. But I was talking to Chris. I can't pronounce his last name. Cudahy is his name. This guy he does a lot of stuff for veterans. I want to give him a shout out because he's an amazing guy. He's a runner, so he's right in my book. And I was able to spend some time with him in the past week while we were off. And he's not a first responder, but he does a lot for the first responders. He ran. I don't even know what he did, but he did a lot of running, a lot of rowing. This man did 7 ultra marathons, which is 30 or 50K, 7 ultra marathons, 7 days in 7 continents.
Wow.
And he rode the Atlantic. He has a Guinness Book of World Records, rode the Atlantic. He said he'll be a guest on our show, which would be good because he raises a lot of money for veterans. And he went off on his whole spiel yesterday about veterans and the care that they get and the care they don't get. And that's, we can use people like him on this show too. He's not a first responder, but he's in tune with everything as far as first responders go, I'm
pretty sure Fox News did a segment on his accomplishments. And, I do work with veterans, and I forgot to mention veterans. I belong to a group, VAV, Veterans Assisting Veterans. I'm a U.S. Army veteran, U.S. Army Military Police Corps, 72 to 75. And, I'm very fortunate. I got out of the service with no ailments. I got out when I was 21. I was just a kid. But, I look back on those 3 years, and it was without a doubt probably 3 of the best years of my life. And, you're serving your country, but you don't even look at it that way. It's just you look at it differently. But there are a lot of veterans war veterans that have been injured, wounded. As a result, they're paralyzed.
Yeah.
Some of them are blind. Some of them lost limbs. I mean, there's a lot of disabled veterans out there that could use our help, and not many people recognize them. So hats off to your friend Chris.
Yeah. Good job, Chris. And we'll be talking soon. Hopefully, me and him will run some ultra marathons together. So, but the other thing you said that my dad was he was in the Army, and he actually ended up getting he walked in front of a tank or near a tank, and his ear plugs something happened, and he ended up going deaf in one ear and hard of hearing in the other ear, and they really didn't do much for him. Right. They didn't recognize it. They looked at him, and then that was it. And he kind of got the shaft, and now I see all these commercials if the earplugs didn't work. This is back in the 60s. My dad was in the Army, but It's a different world now, but everybody wants to sue everybody for everything.
Right.
Let's stop suing and let's take care of the problem. Let's give these guys the right equipment. Let's give them the right stuff that they need, which they do have. I'm sure they have. But let's get them the help when they get out afterwards.
Sure.
These guys you train to be a war machine, a killing machine, and then when they get out, they just drop them in the middle of planet Earth and say, "Yeah, you're on your fucking way. See you later." They might give them some VA stuff and some benefits, as far as that goes. But I think Chris can bring that a lot to our attention for what he does. So the other thing I want to talk about before we bring on our guest, Mike, is you and I had this idea. We want to get patches from all the listeners out there. So if you guys want to send them in, email me at help@friendsinrecoverypodcast.com. And of course, it'll be in all the show notes. I'll give you the address where you can send them to. And along with when you send them in, from your station, your unit, your barracks or city, town, whatever. Let's get these patches, and what we can do is we can display them maybe behind us or maybe on our sign or something. We want to recognize you guys. We want to hear who's listening. We have people in Texas. We have people in California, Minnesota, New York, here in Massachusetts. We have people all over the place. So let's start sending those patches in, and let's recognize all these guys if you think. If you think it's okay, right?
Yeah, it's a great idea, and you said so much. I'm
trying
to keep up.
I know. It's the soda water that's killing me today.
No, that's a good idea, and I think men and women that devote their lives to being first responders, or cops, or firemen, or correctional officers, or veterans. I mean, there's a lot of people out there that they get into collecting patches and stuff. So yeah, that's something. It's a good idea.
Absolutely.
So we have a good guest today. Let's talk about her.
Yeah.
So we have a special guest, Beth Jordan, who's joining us today. Beth is a retired police officer, EMT, and she's currently a therapist. And so, Beth, welcome to the show.
Hi there.
Hi, Beth.
Hey, Beth, how are you?
Good.
Long time no see. Beth and I just had dinner together last week out in Minnesota. I went out to visit her, and we work on a lot of hard cases together. I want to give you a shout out, or whatever you want to call it. I don't know what they call it in podcast land, but you and I over this summer worked on this case. And I just want to point out the dedication before we even start interviewing. I just want to point out the dedication that Beth had to this case. And I know, Mike, I spoke to you about it some time ago. We were at a conference, and she said, "I have this guy that wants to get in." And unfortunately, the insurance wouldn't cover just about anywhere. And we ended up, Beth ended up working on it almost for 3 or 4 days straight with the insurance and trying to figure out what the right place is. And it ended up that Beth felt that Genesis House was the right place for this client, and she did not want him going anywhere except for Genesis House. He did have any other options, but they weren't options for first responders and for the particular problem that he had. And I have to give a shout out to Patient X. We're not going to mention his name, but Patient X. He hung in there, and he did a good job on just staying the course. He did everything you asked him to do. The insurance put him through the ringer, and in the end, Beth was on the phone with everybody, going back and forth, running around, and really putting her time. I seen Beth in action. I was actually with her at the conference. Every break she got, she was on the phone. She was calling insurance companies. She was on the phone with this guy. She was discussing the case with me, discussing the case with Genesis House, and ultimately, unfortunately, the insurance wouldn't pay for it. So Genesis House did step up, and we ended up taking him in on a scholarship, and he did very, very well with us, and that's the type of person that Beth is. And I love being around her and talking to her, and the knowledge that she has is unbelievable. So that's an introduction for Beth Jordan.
So Beth, that was quite an introduction. So what do you do? Tell us about what you're doing right now.
Well, right now I've got a private practice. I've been doing this for about 10 years, and I work with both mental health and addictions. I'm licensed in both. I'm also licensed in the state of Wisconsin because they don't have a lot of therapists with a first responder background either. So I've worked with a little bit with their leader group which is similar to our Minnesota Lima group. And I do training for agencies. I do crisis response for first responder emergencies. And then I see clients one-on-one and for groups and some couples counseling.
Wonderful. Do you find, I mean, obviously you've sat with many people involved with first responder experience and, background in their jobs. What do you see that's different? Like, for an example, like a police officer compared to a manager of a grocery store. I mean, do you see a difference in their personality and in their, maladies, their problems?
Oh, there's a huge difference. And we now know, even with things like PTSD, 10, 15 years ago, we saw PTSD as just being a thing. And now we know it shows differently if the trauma was in childhood as opposed to adulthood. And it shows very differently between military service, first responder service, or civilian populations. And if you don't recognize that and recognize what the training for first responders does to how they behave and how they react and what they are more susceptible or not to, you're not going to be able to understand what the triggers are. I also no longer take civilian clients because I was getting very tired with their casual attitude of making appointments and not showing up, not paying their bills, arguing about things, not telling me if they changed insurance. It just became one hassle after another. And I do not have that with my first responders. They call me as soon as they need a schedule change. They are very apologetic if they have to change anything. They're incredibly respectful. They work really hard at the things I give them. And sometimes I'm really hard on them in order to make change. I'm also fairly abrupt because of my background, very directive, and they're up for that. They want to fix the problem and they want to get to work on it right away. And I really enjoy that in them.
Sure. Yeah. Well, Beth, go a little bit into your background because you do have a fascinating background where you came from. What gives you the privilege to work with these guys? I'm guessing it's your background. I know it's your background, but for TV purposes, what's your background?
Okay. I'm actually a Navy brat. My dad was lifelong Navy. He was a pilot. So I grew up with that whole end of things and the moving around and how that looked in my world. And that really helped shape me too, to understand community does sometimes have to come first. And that's a hard concept for people to get these days because they don't have that kind of community shared trauma or shared experience that we used to back in the 60s, 70s, and even before that. So I joined, I first became an EMT and joined an ambulance service. And I decided pretty quickly I was better cut out for trying to stop things from happening than to fix them after the fact. So I went to school, got a criminal justice degree, and went into law enforcement. And I did that for 21 years. I was on a SWAT team. I was a negotiator, training officer, gun instructor. I ran the chaplain program. I created and ran that for 10 years. I really enjoyed my job, and I enjoyed some of the community outreach and some of the intensity of the job. And after 21 years, on my day off, I was rear-ended by a distracted driver at a stoplight at 60 miles an hour.
Oof.
After a couple of years of intensive physical therapy, my doctors all unanimously said, you can stay in your job, but you're going to retire in a wheelchair. So I had to pull the plug about 10 years ahead of schedule. And when I looked at my resume, it basically said, you chase things, you yell at things, and you shoot at things. And that doesn't make for a lot of job opportunities. So it was back to school. And I looked at my resume, and almost everything I was interested in had a psychological component. So I went into psychology and decided this is what I wanted to do. And first responders were specifically who I wanted to work with because there's not a lot out there for them.
No, there's definitely not. We definitely know that they're few and far between. So
I kind of did the same thing. I was a street cop for 28 years in a cruiser. And then the last 8 years which gave me a total of 35 years. I was the EAP for the Lowell Police Department. I went back and got my master's when I was 47 years old, Salem State University, right down the street from here. And, it's funny because what I do now, work with police officers and firemen and correctional officers, they're very comfortable with me, and I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. I love what you said about the civilian population never keeping their appointments. They take it for granted. They don't want to pay their co-pays. They don't want to, although some cops don't either because they are kind of stingy. But but they always keep their appointments. It's so nice to have someone come to my office that's all geared up. The chief sent them to see me. They don't know who I am. They don't know I'm a retired cop. And as soon as they see the stuff on the walls, my pictures and my police memorabilia, what a difference. They sit down, they relax. It was like we're brothers or sisters, brothers and sisters. So
and that's what this podcast does, is it brings people like Beth and Mike out in the forefront to these first responders, to listen to this. If I was to sit here and say, oh yeah, first responders, I don't have any background. Like I shared in my last show, I ran from you guys 25 years ago with a pocket full of cane and pocket full of cocaine, and I was probably drunk most of the time. That's about all I have to share with you guys. But with the guests that we have on and Mike, these guys feel very comfortable with speaking, and and it shows by the last show. Our first show that we did is unbelievable, and I can only guess it's going to get better with guests like you, Beth, and stuff like that. I want to go back to a conversation that you and I had last week. I'm smiling. We were eating dinner, and we were probably there for almost 3 hours, and the poor waitress kept coming over and ask her, "You guys ready to order? You ready to order?" And we're like, "No." It just we just get together and we just talk and talk. But the population that you work with is fascinating as first responders. But the one population you were talking about was borderline. Do you mind speaking a little bit on borderline?
Sure. And the reason that I got into that whole end of things was that I was asked to assist a colleague of mine who was working on a group project, writing a book on forensic mental health for corrections, courtrooms, that sort of thing. And we worked together on the chapter for borderline personality disorder. I've also worked with quite a few of them in the addictions field as their counselor. So I got to understand that. And what some of my colleagues who also have military or first responder backgrounds and I have noticed is that people with borderline personality disorder, that literally comes from trauma or harm that happened in childhood, and it changes their wiring for emotional connection. So they don't understand emotional connectedness, and they don't understand emotions the way we do. And instead, it ends up being more of a transactional process rather than an emotional connectedness process. And because of the harm, and because it occurs usually in childhood, they move forward with this idea that they are not safe and they never feel safe. And that's an emotional thing, but because they don't understand emotions, because that's been damaged in them, they just simply never feel safe. And we see that they are often drawn to people in the community that make us safe. And that's military and first responders.
Yeah. Beth, real quick, we're gonna take a quick break here. We're gonna talk about the feeling safe and the borderline personalities when we get back right after these messages.
Since 1992, Genesis House has been helping real people heal from addiction on their private recovery campus in beautiful Palm Beach County, Florida. Their family-owned program is accredited by the Joint Commission and offers detox and dual diagnosis treatment in a comfortable and confidential setting. The First Responder Recovery Program at Genesis House is led by a doctorate-level therapist with direct professional experience as a first responder himself. Treatment modalities focus on psychiatric care, relapse prevention, stress management, and trauma-informed care for PTSD. Learn why their individualized approach makes a difference for first responders. Call Genesis House today at 1-800-737-0933 to speak with someone who understands. Visit them on the web at www.genesishouse.net. It's time to start your journey to a long and successful recovery.
Beth, welcome back to the show. It was very interesting what you were talking about, the borderline personalities and how they gravitate and feel safe with police fire. I see kids hanging outside police stations and all over the years, and the firemen always and firewomen always graciously out there talking with them, fixing their bikes, shooting hoops with them. And as a cop, I can remember taking off my pistol belt, throwing it in the trunk. Could never do it today, and throwing up some hoops with kids, buying them ice cream, getting the ice cream truck to come by. And those kids turn into adults. And, some of them actually come into our field. They come in as police officers, firemen, EMS, joining the service. And I've been fortunate enough. One good thing that comes with old age is that you get to see these kids grow up, and they invite you to some of their festivities when they graduate from the police academy or the fire academy or go into the service, So it was really interesting hearing that about borderline. I think that was a great topic to speak about.
Absolutely. Now, again, this topic we had almost a 3-hour discussion last time I met with Beth about the borderlines. So you physically see the first responder as a borderline sometimes, or is it their spouses mainly?
It's usually a family member, like a spouse. Sometimes the first responder is related to somebody with borderline or borderline traits, like a parent or a sibling. And what happens is those people feel very safe being around somebody who provides safety in the form of first responder. The real thing to keep in mind, though, is that a lot of people who have trauma in childhood don't necessarily become borderline personality disorder. What happens is, if they have a stable person in their life, a role model that they can turn to get that emotional component and connectedness, like hanging out with the local fire department and shooting hoops, or if they've got one stable parent and one unstable parent, they're not as likely to develop a personality disorder later in life. But they are, the ones who do are very much drawn to those kinds of occupations or people in those occupations because it tends to make them feel safe. However, it's kind of a false safety because their issues are internal, not external. They're not in external danger. It's an internal emotional safety need. And just being around another person isn't going to fix that. So I end up seeing a lot of relationships that are becoming very toxic because the person with a disorder starts, they get triggered or they start having problems, and it creates problems for the first responder.
So hence the high suicide rate in corrections and law enforcement, and divorce rate in corrections and law enforcement. Would you think that?
I think it contributes a great deal to that, because if one of the components of these relationships is that the first responder, often these are people who are high drive, high energy, and very much into fixing and helping. And if the other person in the relationship keeps saying, you need to make me feel safe, you need to help me, you need to do this better, or if you do that, I'll feel safe, or if you do that, I'll feel good. And it's not always that direct. A lot of times it's much more subtle, but that constant drip, drip, drip of it's your job to make this happen, when that first responder cannot fix that internal problem from the other person's background. I do see that contributing a lot to suicides, because people commit suicide when they don't feel competent as human beings.
So the borderlines make you feel incompetent? Is that what it's like? So they have the control over you?
It can lead to that, because you can never fix it.
Yeah.
If your job in the world is to fix problems for other people, and the one that you love the most you can never help or fix, that's got to make people feel very, very
vulnerable
as a person.
Yeah, absolutely.
And on top of that, people with borderline often become either suicidal or self-harm because they can never feel safe.
Yeah. And you treat the borderlines there, and you will treat their families, because you said you do couple counseling also.
I work with the first responders. I do not work with the spouses, but I do have.
Okay.
I routinely will refer them to. So if I'm seeing a first responder and they need couples counseling, I have some trusted marriage and family therapy counselors I will send them to as a couple.
Good.
I will insist, your spouse also needs to be seeing somebody one-on-one to help them get some coping skills for what they're dealing with, because the relationship can't last otherwise.
The way it's going, yeah. And we can talk hours on this subject, and we did last time we were together. I did want to point one thing out, and I think this is something good for the first, well, for anybody in counseling and maybe the first responders world. You told me something fascinating in our meeting last week. You can tell how somebody feels by when they just come into your office. She's smiling again.
Yeah.
By the way they come into your office. I thought that was pretty fascinating. I was reading Brian Casey's book. He's going to be a guest on our show. And he said, a police officer's job is to read the room, understand what's going on. And I think I know I do that because I have to develop relationships with people, but you guys do that on a different level. And it was fascinating. If you want to just go if you want to reveal your secret, if you don't want to, you can stay anonymous on that. But about your waiting room.
Yeah. So my waiting room, you come into my office suite, you come directly into the waiting room, and on the side wall, the front wall is the door from the hallway, and the side wall is the door back into the office area. And I have chairs along the other two walls, and I can tell by where somebody is standing or sitting and how they are looking or where they are looking when I open the door. I can tell exactly what kind of a state they're in, how anxious or nervous they are, or if they've been triggered.
Wow. That's amazing. I mean, and this conversation go on for days too. And do you see that, Mike? Do you understand? You understand that?
I share office with 4 incredibly gifted clinical social workers. They're all licensed social workers. One of them is a widow of a police officer who passed away in his mid-30s from a cancer, and the other women they're just wonderful therapists. I've learned a lot from them. But we have kind of a liberal atmosphere in the waiting room where we have Oprah magazines and we have Time and Life or whatever. But in my office, it's all police all day long. Pictures, old pictures from the 1800s. It's a lot of police memorabilia. Some of the awards I've won over the years. It's kind of an atmosphere that it might be called a busy atmosphere. But what I do is I bring clients in. I tell them I'll be right back. I usually go make a cup of tea or I just go wash my hands. I let them absorb what they're about to sit in for an hour, 45 minutes to an hour. And when I come back, I can always tell, who's basically they ask questions about what's on the wall. Some people completely ignore it, but anybody that's in law enforcement or EMS usually has a comment about it. And, I think it's what you just said. It gives me an insight into, what we're going to be discussing, which is, kind of an upper hand. I don't think they realize. No one's ever said to me, "Is that why you let me in here for 5 minutes by myself?" Or no?
Well, when you walk into a room, and I think, as police officers, when you guys walk into a room and you have to assess the situation, see what's going on, if there's weapons, if there's whatever the case may be, you have to make that assessment pretty quickly so your life or anybody's lives are not in danger. If they are, you have to know how to wipe that danger out immediately. And that's good to know that you do that. Both of you guys do that in therapy sessions, and because you want to wipe that danger out really quickly, figure out what's going on with that person, why they're not feeling good that day, and because it could be life or death. That guy might walk out of your office and say, fuck it, I don't want to live anymore, and
I've had that happen. I had a fireman hug me on a Tuesday. He was going through a domestic with his wife and one of his children. He was a Lowell firefighter, great guy. And he had been sober a little over 30 days. Everything was going wonderfully. And he walked out of my office on a Tuesday. He was a big guy. He's about 6'2". He gave me a hug. I'm 5'8", a little uncomfortable, but but a great guy. And I got a call Saturday morning. I just pulled into this beach house, family beach house up in Maine. I got a call that he had hung himself in the hose tower, the tower where the firemen, put their hoses to drain. And it was horrible. It was horrific, and it just made me question my ability as a therapist. That was my question to you. I'm sure you've had cases where there's been bad results. And do you feel the guilt? Do you feel like you didn't do enough? Do you question your ability? Is that a common thing, do you think, for therapists?
I think it's terribly common. And anytime I have a client who has committed suicide or is hospitalized or ends up going to inpatient someplace, I will immediately go straight to my notes and start reviewing them and look for what did I not see here. But I also had extensive training, and I'm a specialist in police suicide. And I took the COPS training years ago, which is an excellent program. I know that the signs in first responders are going to be immensely subtle compared to what we are expecting to see. It's going to be things as simple as, the officer who's always the first one on a call suddenly is the ticket Nazi on the department instead. Everybody just overlooks that and says, hey, he's one of our most productive guys. Yeah, but if you change focus that completely, that's a warning sign.
Sure.
But we miss them a lot. And responders don't ask for help. And the last place they break down is going to be in front of other help.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
You say you miss them a lot, but you catch a lot too, Beth. And you, Mike, and all the other folks out there helping the first responders. How many lives? I know we don't like to say we save lives, but you do. How many times did you? Maybe that person that walked into your office that didn't feel right that day is walking out of the office having something to live for now. And so I wouldn't cut yourself down as far as that goes. We can't save everybody. In the drug and alcohol field, we hear the deaths too because of all the opiates and fentanyl out there. Unfortunately, we can't save everybody, but we try to our best. And you know what? That one person that we saved today or whatever it is, or we helped get their life back in order, it's a check in the W's column for us. And we want that, even if it's just one or two. Like Mike said on one of our earlier shows, our last show, is that we want to just save one life out of this show, and I think we're going to help save more than one lives by giving everybody this information and having guests like you on, and and kind of getting the word out. We're running out of time here, but Beth, real quick, tell us the name of your practice and how somebody can get a hold of you. If they want to chat or send you an email or whatever, and maybe come see you if they're in the Minnesota area, or you can recommend a therapist outside the area.
Sure. My business is Jordan Consulting and Counseling. I'm in Maple Grove, Minnesota, which is the northwest corner of the Twin Cities. I also do video sessions, but again, I'm only licensed in Minnesota and Wisconsin. So if you're in Texas, I cannot do video sessions.
We got to work on that license,
Texas. But they can reach me directly through my website as well. I've got contact me through there, and that's jordancandc.com. JORDANCANDC.com.
And of course, all that'll be in the the show notes too. So just look forward. If you're listening to us, it's all in the show notes. So. Well, I'd like to thank Beth Jordan. She's a wonderful guest for joining us today. It was just a very informative, and you were informative and very amazing. You're a great therapist, and anybody in Minnesota, the Minneapolis area, if they can get to you, please, get to Beth. She's definitely, for the first responders, she's well worth going to see. If you have any kind of problems or you want to work anything out, I really highly recommend her. So thanks again, Beth.
Thank you, Beth.
Yeah.
Very enlightening. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, Mike, that was a good show.
Great show.
Yeah. We covered a lot of topics there, and I know we spent some time on a few different things, but this is what it's about.
Absolutely.
Getting this information out, and maybe somebody's sitting there saying, maybe my loved one or my spouse is a borderline, or maybe I'm not feeling good today. Maybe I do need to go see a person like Mike Miles or Beth Jordan. So,
well, I think what's important is suicide is such a a final dagger in the heart for anybody, especially the family. And it's there was just one recently in Sweet's hometown. A police officer committed suicide. I think he had 4 or 5 children, young adults, young teens. I mean, and I've been to several funerals where the casualty of this job, I'd like to say, has caused suicide. And having someone like Beth, who's just so in tune to exactly, she knows right away. And I got to say, I've had firemen and police officers go in correctional officers, go see regular therapists, a therapist who's, I shouldn't say regular, a therapist who doesn't have the training or the background. And, I don't know how much they get out of it, because sometimes they're afraid to talk about their concerns or issues. They don't want to lose their job. They don't want to lose the ability to carry a firearm. They're afraid to talk about suicide ideation, which is a common place for anybody in law enforcement, especially because we go to suicides. And sometimes if you're out of suicide and your own life isn't in order and you're having problems like everybody does, as cops are just a mirror image of society, as you know, Ed.
Yeah.
It could trigger them. So,
yeah. Well, the thing with police officers, especially police officers, you and I work with police officers all the time, but first responders, we all have trauma in our lives. There might be PTSD, something might have happened to us in our childhood. Life isn't perfect, but you guys, we can back out of it. We don't have to go into it. We don't have to run into a fire. I've never pulled a weapon out on somebody and told them to get down on the fucking ground. I never did any of that. But once you guys do that, you might have to take the next step, whatever that might be. You know what I mean? And we know sometimes it doesn't end well if they're not listening. And you have to force yourself into that situation where we don't have to. And a lot of trauma comes up. And again, you guys are human beings. You feel me touching you, right? You guys are human beings, and you're just like myself and Sweet. And but you guys have to force yourself in those situations, and that's where that trauma and PTSD really kick up then.
I've been in a lot of fights, and I can tell you 99% of the time there wasn't something I initiated or wanted to do, but you have no choice.
Yeah.
If somebody's attacking somebody, you have to stop it. If someone's going to attack you, you have to defend yourself or defend somebody who's standing behind you. And sometimes you go on a call and you go to save somebody, a spouse who's being attacked, and all of a sudden you're being attacked by the victim, as well as the suspect, and that's happened to me once. I had a call for help. I had a man and a woman, both of them on me, big people. And it was disturbing. I was wondering if they were going to try to get my gun, if this was a setup, is there a knife involved? A million things were going through my head while I'm rolling around the living room on a Saturday morning. You know?
And that's true. That's stuff that civilians don't think about. You guys, you're going to pull your gun out, and we think you guys got it all under control. No, because it's an unpredictable situation. Right. Is a guy going to grab my gun? What's going to happen to me? Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, good show today, Ed. Yeah. And I want to put the book out again, A25. I'm pretty sure it's on Amazon. Harold Waterhouse and Jason Strunk. These guys, they changed the city that was being systematically, I don't want to say burnt down, but there was tons of fires, casualties, deaths. And these two men, these two heroes, I call them, they changed it, and they made a difference. And talk about a wealth of knowledge. Maybe we can get Harold. He's 92 on the show sometime.
Yeah, get him on the show, and that stuff will be in the notes too. Right. We'll get all that information in there.
So I want to thank Genesis House.
Yep. And if you have any questions or you'd like to be a guest on our show, or submit a question for a topic for discussion, please visit our Facebook page. It's Answering the Call, the First Responders Podcast, or send us a message by email at help@friendsandrecoverypodcast.com.
Right. And we would be very remiss if we didn't thank Sweets for this beautiful studio.
Yeah, Sweets. We didn't hear from you on this episode. Sweets, how are you over there?
Still there, Sweets?
I'm here. Doing well.
How do we do?
You did fantastic. Wonderful. It was a great show.
Did we sound like we know what we're talking about?
It sounded that way. We'll leave that up to the listeners.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. Send us emails on that too if you guys have anything that you want to kind of add to this.
Right. And as always, we're grateful for the privilege to share our stories and insight with you, the listener.
That's right. Stay safe, everybody.
That concludes this episode of Answering the Call, the First Responder Podcast. Thanks to Genesis House for sponsoring the show and supporting our first responders who are struggling with addiction and mental health. Follow us on Facebook for past shows and updates. If you are interested in becoming a guest on the show, email us at help@friendsandrecoverypodcast.com.